From the shores of Nova Scotia to the rocks of Newfoundland, to the streets of Quebec City, I'll be your wandering man. From the Gulf Stream of St. Lawrence out to the prairie song, up in the Rocky Mountains, I'll be wandering on. I'm wandering on. I'm wandering on. Singing your song. I'm wandering on.
I'm wandering Canada in the Rocky Mountains, and I've come here to Lake OHara, one of the jewels of the Rockies. It was here that many of Canada's painters loved to come and paint. It's a tradition that began over 100 years ago. It was made most famous by members of the Group of Seven. There's many talented painters painting the Rockies today. Let's go and see who's dreaming the Rockies. Come along. My quest started at the lodge built by Jimmy Simpson at Bow Glacier in the Columbia Icefield of the Alberta Rockies. The lodge was called Num Tija. My first question to the innkeeper of the lodge, Leo Donnell, was, who is Jimmy Simpson?
Jimmy Simpson is a remittance man from England. He came over in 1898. He'd heard about all the adventure in the mountains out here. When he first arrived here, he swore that one day he'd build a shack here. We think it's a pretty impressive shack.
Can you tell us about Jimmy Simpson, the Rocky Mountain painter?
Jimmy was very much a visionary, but his interest in the arts start with his artist-in-residence program. He was going through a hunting magazine and saw a painting by a gentleman named Carl Rungius. Carl Rungius is a famous, mostly known for his big game wildlife paintings. So he sent Carl a letter inviting him out to paint big game. Jimmy could lead him to them. So as the story goes, Carl read the letter and crumpled it up and threw it on the floor, and his wife uncrumpled it and read it and said, "Carl, you write this man back. Go see him." So of course he did. And that was the beginning of Carl having a studio in Banff for about 40 years. But this was the beginning of Jimmy's artist-in-residence program. Jimmy outfitted and guided Carl out into the hills for weeks or months at a time. In exchange for that, Carl would give Jimmy his paintings. Over the years, Jimmy had a handful of artists through the area, but he didn't really proactively try and develop this as much as it came naturally to him as an artist himself. And today it is vibrant and thriving. We have Rocky Mountain artists coming to paint the Rockies regularly to the lodge. It's a program that has evolved generally out of word of mouth. As in our own personal travels, we see artist paintings on the wall that we like. We often inquire as to who the artist is and any contact information and invite them out. There's a little bit of a qualification program. The work, should fit in, but I'm finding these days that I'm most interested in those rare views or places that people don't normally paint, but they've spent enough time in the area that we're getting some unique angles on those mountains.
Where are some of the favorite areas for them to paint around Bow Lake?
Well, geez, the most natural one is to step out the front door and go, wow, and paint Bow Glacier or Crowfoot Glacier.
What do you think is the legacy of Jimmy Simpson for Canada?
The legacy of Jimmy Simpson for Canada would be a respect for the mountains and a respect for culture.
Jimmy Simpson passed away in 1972. He was 95 years old. 2 years later, in 1974, a 9,700-foot peak right outside his lodge was named Mount Jimmy Simpson. This was a tribute to this great mountain man. Continuing my quest, I went to the city of Banff, Alberta, where I wandered my way into the White Museum of the Canadian Rockies. So Lisa, we're here in the White Gallery. Can you tell us how did the White Gallery come into being?
Well, Catherine Robb, who was a really wealthy, privileged Bostonian woman, met Peter White from Banff at the Museum School of Fine Arts in Boston. They fell in love, were married, and came back to Banff, built a life, built a home here, painted all over in the Canadian Rockies, and accumulated this wonderful body of their work, other work that they collected, and eventually founded the White Museum of the Canadian Rockies.
How did they come to meet the group of seven, and in particular J.E.H. MacDonald?
Well, it was one of those lucky chances of life because Peter was an art student and a Banff boy. He was working for the Brewster Outfitter Company, which took people into the backcountry. So whenever artists wanted to work in the backcountry, they were set up with Peter as a guide. And he was matched up with J.H. MacDonald. They went into Lake OHara, and 1924, it must have been an amazing time, these two guys in the backcountry for the first time. And Peter was a student and had plans to be an artist. And here's this senior Canadian painter who was really quite a celebrity in Canada at that time because the group of seven was in its heyday. There was lots of controversy in the papers. So they met in this wonderful place and painted together and found that they were really of the same mind and enjoying Lake OHara. It was a special spot for both of them.
So J.H. MacDonald came in 24 and he kept returning until his death.
He did. He was obsessed with Lake OHara, and I think part of the reason why was because Lake OHara gave him every challenge he needed as a painter. You have changing light, you have changing color. The wind blows across the lake in the mountains and the color changes instantly. The runoff from the glaciers increases with the heat of the day, the color of the water changes. And he enjoyed all of this and thought it was a great challenge.
You've written a guide, your first book, and what's it called?
It's called Hiker's Guide to Art of the Canadian Rockies, and it's a look at a number of painters who worked in the Rockies, the places where they worked, and it's actually a trail guide because I feel very strongly that in order to really get a feel for what this kind of landscape art is all about, you have to put in your time. You have to go out there. You have to go out to Lake OHara or to the foot of Mount Robson or wherever it is, because you'll then be more in the spirit of the artist. You'll have trekked 25 kilometers up a trail in the rain, and you'll be there. And it's quite intriguing to follow their travels, see where they went, see if you can figure out exactly where a painting is. That's kind of my gig, I guess, is trying to figure out exactly where they would have been to capture whatever image it is.
What do you think is the legacy of the Rocky Mountain painters today?
Well, for me, I think that through their artwork, we can look back in time, and that's a wonderful thing for all of us to do, learn about where we've been. And I also think that they had a great vision, particularly the group of seven, for art in Canada, and they had a great respect for the landscape of Canada. And I think that's something that can really be beneficial in our everyday lives, respect for the land, and how incredibly privileged we are in Canada to have all this wilderness around us. I mean, it's just amazing what we have. People come from all over the world for that privilege, and we have it here. So I think that we need to cherish that and respect it, and I think paintings go a long way for emblazing that in our minds as Canadians.
I talked a bit more with Lisa regarding her work as a curator and an author, but it was time for me to wander on. On my way out of the White Museum, I decided to get a copy of Lisa's book for myself. But for some reason, modern technology decided to play tricks on me, and the simple process of buying a book turned out to be a 20-minute-long struggle of a man versus a machine. Finally, it was done and over with, and once again, I was on my way. Armed with Lisa Christensen's Hiker's Guide to the Art of the Canadian Rockies, I continued on with my travels. Lisa's book fascinated me and helped me to discover many nature versions of Canadian Rockies paintings by the Group of Seven and other talented as well as timeless artists. While enjoying the picturesque views, I came across a painter creating a modern time masterpiece of the Canadian Rockies, Michael Cameron. In the pouring rain, we started our conversation with the logical question of how he became a painter.
Painting was a choice I made a long time ago. When I was a kid, I lived in Ottawa. My idea of extracurricular activity would be go to the art gallery. Instead of, I'd get on the bus to go to school, but I'd stay on the bus, go all the way to the National Gallery and look at the Group of Seven all day long. That's what got me into painting, is that I thought, oh, this is really cool. These guys are doing something they love to do. And it gets them outside, you're all over the place. So that's sort of the reason for it. It's that freedom, I think.
I asked Mike what brought him to the Canadian Rockies.
My sisters moved out here, so I came to visit in 1990, and I'm still here. So it was just for a visit, and then I just said, oh, this is great. This is really beautiful out here. And I'd never painted the mountains before. I'd never been to the Rockies, so here I came and I stayed, and it took me a long time to figure out how to paint the mountains. It's really tricky after you've painted in the east where there's no mountains, so it took me about 6 or 7 years before I figured it out.
I asked Mike, does he think that the tradition of landscape painting in Canada is in danger of disappearing because of the modern obsession with new media?
I think there's always going to be painters. I think they'll always paint the mountains, they'll always paint whatever kind of is surrounding them right at that moment. I mean, I went out east last year to Cape Breton, and that was fantastic to paint out there. It's totally different. So I think it just depends, like, where you are, and I think that tradition will always continue. It just, I was joking earlier, painting is dead, and it's not cool if you're a painter, if you're in the real art scene, to like the Group of Seven right now. But at some point, you don't care about stuff like that. You go with what you like. Everybody finds beauty in different things, and you saw my earlier painting, and I find beauty in the sort of a darkness, more of a sublimeness about it. In that sort of way of painting, there's stuff that comes out that you don't have any control of, but it comes out and it looks beautiful. I guess that's why I've always been attracted to it. I don't know where it came from, but I've always painted fairly moody paintings.
It was time for me to move on, so I said goodbye to Michael Cameron and left him to work on his new painting. Soon the rain was gone, and I met with another artist working on her painting of the Canadian Rockies.
I came up here with my family 14 years ago, and we loved it. We stayed. I've always wanted to get out of the city, and it's just a really beautiful place to be.
So Karen, one that you're painting right now, how does it feel? Like, what state are you in when you're doing this?
Because the atmosphere is changing so much, I don't have time to think about anything except trying to get it before it disappears, because the sky changes a lot, changes really quickly. So I'm actually not thinking about anything else except trying to get that down, or to get the light that I need right away. It's just, I really love the chaos. I like things rapid change, and then I have to try and follow through and try and get it down as it's moving. That's sort of, I think that shows up in a lot of my painting.
Do you think what you're doing is important?
Yes, I do. You sort of hear, painting is dead. Video seems to be taking over. It's a bit of a tough time against television and computer imaging and that sort of thing. But I think it's so close to the spirit. It's the next best step, So I don't know. Personally, I don't think it's going to die. I'll never stop painting, because to me it's just the perfect expression for that, and I think we need it. I think it's such a vast place, and there's a lot of weight Like the mountains make you so small, and I think they humble you a lot. And it just, mentally, it's a great space to be able to escape here. You have the freedom to move wherever you want, to choose whatever you want. You're not on a 9 to 5.
Karen, how long do you see yourself painting the Rockies?
Oh, probably until I die.
Are you planning on living to a ripe old age?
Sure. I don't know if it's going to happen though. My studio's fairly toxic environment.
As an artist and as a Canadian, do you think the idea of Canadian nationalism and art, is that important today?
Oh, I think definitely. I think it even needs to be stressed more now than ever, because we seem to be losing a grasp of that. We seem to be really pulling towards the technological, and human beings need to be close to the landscape. And Canadians as a whole have always been, but it's starting to become very urban. I think that's why you find a lot of people traveling now across the country, because they need it. They need to be in that space again. And I feel really proud that I'm able to represent that. I can keep that going.
My last stop during my trip was Lake OHara. I just had to visit the place which many of the group of 7 artists considered to be their favorite spot in the Canadian Rockies. When I got to Lake OHara, I unexpectedly bumped into my old friend Mel Hurtig, who is a famous Canadian nationalist and a publisher. I asked Mel what brought him to Lake OHara.
This is my favorite place in the whole world. I've been coming here for years and years and years, and I love it.
What happens to you when you're up here? What do you experience?
I'll tell you what, you never think about any of your problems. You never think about any of the complexities of your life. You never think about, oh God, I should be doing this. Instead, you become totally relaxed.
Mel, you've been known as one of our great Canadian nationalists, and you choose a place like Lake OHara to come for a holiday. Is that a Canadian choice?
It's not just a Canadian choice. It just happens to be the most wonderful, magnificent, superb place I've ever been in the world. I've traveled in the Orient, I've traveled in Europe, traveled in the United States, etc. I know of no place that has the magic of Lake OHara. I think we're incredibly lucky to live in this country. We have this most magnificently beautiful country. We have the mountains, we have fabulous forests, we have the world's first or second greatest supply of fresh water. We've got a gorgeous 3-ocean coastline. We've got natural resources that most other countries would die for. We have a wonderful mixture of people, a multicultural people who are very relatively well educated compared to other countries. I think we're so darn lucky to live in this country, and people often ask me, why are you such a nationalist? And I say, well, look, the things that I talk about and I aspire to wouldn't be called nationalism in any other country in the world, certainly not in the United States. So I just want to remind people how fortunate we are and how very important it is that we don't give it all away.
I hear your heart listening, and it seems to me that we have always been part of the dream of green mountains growing, rivers that flow to the sea, the visions we see, one mighty symphony. When we're dreaming the Rockies, the vision we see. When we're dreaming the Rockies, our spirits fly free, you and me. I know you've been crying about all of the taking and greed that makes our earth bleed. For what do we need but sunlight and bread, songbirds that sing through the sky, and coyotes that cry, and the Rockies in our eye? When we're dreaming the Rockies, the visions we'll see. When we're dreaming the Rockies, our spirits fly free, you and me. I hear your laughter where the wild trails wind past the old timber line, just letting it be. Campfires burning, hearts that are yearning to see the great mystery, to live in harmony. When we're dreaming the Rockies, the visions we see. When we're dreaming the Rockies, our spirits are free, you and me.
It was time to say goodbye to Lake OHara Lodge and the Rocky Mountain dreamers of yesterday and today. I heard a new song in the wind, and I knew it was time to wander on.